In tonight's workshop, we are meeting Brian Brady, who is a police chief and a detective who writes police procedural mysteries. And his gripping crime novel, Greed, is part of a police procedural series that's based upon 30 years of experience in law enforcement, which from the urban avenues of Los Angeles and university streets of Berkeley to the remote highways around the Hopi and Navajo tribal lands. So, having given you that introduction, Brian, do you want to talk for a few minutes about your very diverse career in,
Sure.
in law enforcement?
Okay, I'll start. I was born and raised in San Francisco. That's home, and I was going to go to SFPD initially. And back then, your uncorrected vision for San Francisco had to be 2040, corrected to 2020. Mine was 2050, so they wouldn't take me. So a friend of mine from the department suggested I go to Berkeley. So I ended up going to Berkeley, and I spent 9 years there. I was a police officer and a sergeant. And then I took a promotional test and went down to Baldwin Park, which is a city of about 85,000 in East LA.
Mm.
Well, I was there for 2 years and then took a captain's test in Farmington, New Mexico, up in the Four Corners area. Spent 4 years there and then came back to Novato, just north of San Francisco, as a captain, and then ultimately was appointed chief and retired there as the police chief. And from there, I went back to Los Angeles and spent 10 years as the vice president of corporate security for NBC Universal. And from there, I came back home and spent a year with the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art as the director of security on the conversion and the rebuilding of the museum. And now I try and write, and I do some consulting work with a security company here in the Bay Area.
That's amazing. It's an incredibly diverse career. And it's interesting that having done so many things, you've now decided to write fiction based upon, and specifically police procedural work. Is it because you want to tell the world about the kind of people that you met and the kind of criminals that you helped capture and the kind of crimes that they committed?
That's part of it. The other part, I like the characters. The beauty of crime fiction is you can spend time on the character. On true crime, it's really event focused. And sometimes if you watch a true time show on television, it's an hour long, but the reality of everything that took place, you probably could have condensed in 20 minutes. And there's a lot of stuff that I personally don't find all that interesting. But in fiction, you have the chance to make your character deeper, hopefully more likable, and that people can relate to. So for me, it was a chance to take people I'd worked with and take component parts of individuals and create my detectives out of those component parts. And the cases they investigate are usually composites of cases that either I worked on or good friends have worked on that they've shared with me. Over the years, I kept a file folder of anecdotal information and cases, bits and pieces. And sometimes we'd have a conversation like we're having, and someone said, "You want to write that down? That's really good." So finally, I did, and that's how it all came about. So stories they're real, but it's not a specific real. The second book, Hiding in Plain Sight, is loosely based on an actual kidnapping and murder of a 13-year-old that I worked on. So that's close to true, although in the book, it's a serial killer. In real life, it wasn't. It was a one-off situation, so a little bit different.
That's that is fascinating. One of the things you'd mentioned is that when you're writing about the police officers in your work, sometimes you're drawing upon officers that you've known, or you've created composite characters that are based upon people that you've worked with. Is it the case that I think when I read crime fiction, a lot of times I'm thinking, how real could this possibly be? Is this really what police officers are like? And obviously, there's good and bad of everybody. There's people who are very expert at their jobs. There are people who are really bad at their jobs. But it seems like you have the capacity to be able to talk about police officers as they really are, and also to talk about the kinds of experiences they actually have in the real world.
I think, thank you. That's one of the things I try and do. I think the best cop turned writer was Joseph Wamba, and he just passed away this last February. And I thought his work was spectacular. And he was, in my mind, one of the best descriptive writers that I read. Uh, I could read a Wamba character. I could find that person in Times Square on New Year's Eve in New York. It was so vivid. And I love that about his characters. And he once said in one of his books, that he was so right, that if you're going to succeed in this business, you need three things: a sense of humor, common sense, and compassion. Those are the hallmarks of a good cop. And Buff put it in one sentence. And that's really true. You need empathy. You need compassion. You need to care. Common sense is huge. Sometimes you color outside the lines. Sometimes you have to, I don't mean that you break the law. I don't mean, I'm just talking about where you have to think outside the box sometimes and sometimes that's to help somebody too. It's not just to catch a bad guy. And then the compassion. And then you should, without a sense of humor, the bad part of the job will eat you up. You've got to be able to have friends that you can hang out with. You got to be able, it doesn't have to be job friends. And it could be, I have a very dear friend who, he and his wife, and he was a police officer for 32 years. And he and his wife would have a Christmas party every year. And then this Christmas party, literally, there were 70 people at this party. And I bet you only 10 of them were police officers. They had such an incredible, eclectic collection of friends that spanned way beyond law enforcement. And I always admired them for that they had this great circle of friends and great input. And as a consequence, I think he was a very well-rounded individual. And I think that's critical to surviving in the job because you do see bad things.
So, as a police chief, you must have been in the position of hiring police officers to work with you. And I'm sure that you very quickly got a sense for folks that you thought were going to do well in the profession and some that you thought were not going to do so well. Is that the case? And do you find that when you're writing characters in your pieces that some of your police officers measure up and then other police officers fall short?
Sure. There's always the officious officer, and you can have that person in the book and they can be on a perimeter, and you can have a situation where, let's say, a reporter comes up to the barricade and the officer talks to them, talks down, is abrupt, whatever. And then your detective can come over and smooth it over. So you can portray the person, a trait that you don't want to see in somebody. And then somebody able to come over, smooth it over, and do the right thing, so to speak, and make it a little more palatable. So yeah, you do that. And that's why I said they're composites. They're not all good. The character have their foibles and they make mistakes, and no one's perfect. And I think hopefully that's what makes the characters relatable.
It's interesting because one of the things we talked about when you and I were doing sort of the pre-interview for the show a while back, you mentioned the fact you participated in community based policing in Berkeley and what that actually meant since you were a detective and since you work with detectives who worked in that environment and why it brought something pretty valuable to the table. Do you want to talk about what community-based policing is and how it relates to homicide specifically?
Sure. Berkeley was unique, is unique for lots of reasons. And as far as being a police officer, it was an incredible training ground. The department held you to a very high standard. They were the college cops. We were supposed to be the best of the best. And we had a lot to live up to. People who went before us had really done some important things. The police chief in Berkeley back in the 20s, August Balmer. These are pieces of information that people will just shake their head. Berkeley was the first police department to have motorized patrol cars.
Mm.
First department to have radios in the cars. First department to use a lie detector.
Wow.
And this first department to have police dog. A number of firsts, a fingerprint system that predates the FBI system. So we were proud of where we came from. And their theory was you would one officer cars and you made the beats geographically small. And if you had a call of a domestic violence or an alarm or something, you sent two cars, and that's just the way you did things. And as a consequence, if you were operating on a beat that might have only been 12 blocks long and 10 blocks wide, you got to know everybody on the beat. You got to know who got off the bus at midnight getting off the 4 to 12 shift. and walked home, who was going to work at midnight on the midnight to 8 shift. You knew who should be there, who shouldn't be there, what businesses were open, what were closed, all those kinds of things. And to me, that was what community policing was all about, knowing the area you worked, knowing the people that lived in the area, knowing their habits, and knowing when something was out of place. If Joe's diner closed at such and such a time, you knew if you drove by on the midnight shift and there was a light on in the back, that shouldn't happen. That closed at such and such a time, so something was awry. And it could be as simple as the owner could out heard it. Something could have happened, but you'll find them. Where sometimes today, I think we have a situation where my pet peeve is a police car driving down the street with the officer in the car and the window rolled up. My sergeant, when I was on the job, I would have gotten written up for that. I'd been home working in my rock garden for a couple of days for driving around with my window up. And so that's the beginning of it. With that, and that's your background, as you promote into investigations, you take that with you. As you work in different segments of the community, different beats, different areas, you should develop this sense of community, the heartbeat of where you are, what's going on. Probably one of the inspectors in Berkeley who worked robbery and he worked homicide, he saw more cases from his desk probably than anybody walking around. He literally would pick up the phone and call this person or that, but people he'd cultivated over the years and knew him and trusted him. And he'd say, "Gee, 2 guys robbed a liquor store on San Pablo Avenue at 3:00 yesterday afternoon. It sure sounded like so and so. What can you tell me?" 2 phone calls later, 3 phone calls later, he had them. And he knew exactly who. So one, he had an idea of who he was looking for to begin with. And secondly, he knew who to call. And that makes the investigations so much easier.
It's interesting because you've described them as operating as small town police officers in a big city.
Absolutely. That's a great description. That's what they did. You became Andy Mayberry on your beat. You knew everybody.
I think that must have been a very powerful experience to start your career at. Probably impacted you everywhere that you worked.
Probably if someone asked me, where were you a police officer? That's the first place I identify with. I still belong to the Retirees League from Berkeley. They're kind enough, even though I didn't retire from there. If you left the department under honorable circumstances, you can be an honorary member. So I still get to go to the functions and see people that I worked with. And as a matter of fact, I did a book signing in the East Bay and Walnut Creek, and several people from the department who I've worked with showed up. And it was fun. You reminisce, and it was really nice of them to show up. But it was still great to see you.
It was also really interesting to hear you talk about moving to arguably a very different community on on the edge of the Hopi and Navajo reservations, because obviously the tribal police face a very difficult situation in terms of being able to protect their citizenry because it's a very huge amount of land and they must rely extensively on local law enforcement surrounding them on a regular basis.
They do. The Navajo police, in my experience, our western boundary was the Navajo Nation. And the east of us, not on our border, but not too far, was the Hickory Apache Reservation. And because of the Four Corners area, in the Utah, the Ute tribe, and then of course you said the Hopi, they were there. And then further south, if you got down toward Albuquerque and a little bit east, there was a Mescalero Apache. So there was a ton of Native American people living in that general area. In the Navajo police, that's the biggest reservation in the country. And they're spread thin. And they make a car stop on the res at 2 a.m. Their backup could be 45 minutes away, driving as fast as they can to get to them. And frequently, we were a lot closer. Even though they technically were a sovereign nation, etc., we would back them up. And the state police did the same thing. The county sheriff did the same thing. We're all in the same boat. So you've got to row together, otherwise you're going to sink. By the same token, they were also the upgrade benefit to us. If we ended up, sometimes we'd get somebody who was from the far reaches of the reservation. They had come into town. Maybe they were going to buy supplies. They were going to get grain. Maybe they're groceries. It didn't matter. But sometimes you'd get one of the older, little dementia that got separated, and they don't speak English. Some of the ones that live out on the outskirts of the reservation, they only speak Navajo. So you've got this person, and it's like you're in a foreign country that you can't communicate. So having the Navajo police right there who could come in and interpret for you, deal with that. Plus, they could also then, half the time, they didn't know who the person was. And they'd be able to take them back and reunite them with the family that got separated. It was a good learning experience. I thoroughly enjoyed my time there.
It sounds like the kinds of problems that they faced were s similar to, because we have that problem these days, right? We have people with dementia that get away from their families and they're lost in a city and there's a million people around, but nobody knows who they are. How do you get them back where they belong? And I think, which is a huge part of community-based policing, it's a lot of it seems like it has a lot in common with being the teacher monitoring the schoolyard.
Yeah. I think that's probably one way of phrasing it. The reservation has its issues. And I feel horrible, some of the things that go on in and I'll just mention, like, for instance, COVID. It really devastated the Navajo Nation. And part of it was the healthcare was substandard. And the other part is you have people living in very remote areas who couldn't get to healthcare, even if it had been first class. And I have a friend who runs a trading post right on the edge of the reservation. And he has been trading, his family has been trading since 1875.
Wow.
And I stopped in there not too long ago and catch up. And I was talking with him. And the Navajos, if someone dies, they buy a new Pendleton blanket. And the person is wrapped in a brand new Pendleton blanket. And I asked him, I said, have you recovered pretty much from the pandemic now and things getting back? And he said, yeah, it's getting better. He said, but up until 6 months ago, the biggest selling item in my trading post was Pendleton blankets.
Mm.
And I thought that was just awful. And that's people, he said, they were just decimated the reservation. And that was really sad that it didn't have to be that way. And it just took out a ton of people. And I came away from that down about the whole thing. And, but I did love my time there. And I loved working with the Navajo police that they were, and so they do some things there too. You see the movies where you have the Native American tracker.
Mm.
There are a lot of those guys in that tribe that can track, and really, honest to God, track stuff that totally foreign to me. But I worked with a couple of them on a search and rescue where we were tracking somebody, and all we were supplying was extra manpower for them. But they were doing it, and they were amazing. I love watching that. I thought that was just what a skill.
That is amazing. The So you've worked in a wide variety of communities in addition to doing the urban communities of up north and down here in Baldwin Park and so forth, and working on the edge of a variety of tribal reservations. You've also worked with the hoi polloi and the rich and famous at a Hollywood studio. So you've seen the gamut of life experience, haven't you?
I did, and I love my time at Universal. I had a great boss. And his name was Jim Waters. He was the head of studio operations, and Ron Meyer was the CEO of the studio. And I couldn't have worked for two better people. They treated everybody well. They were smart. They got it in Ron. He founded CAA. He's a legend in Hollywood, and he started in the mailroom, and he never forgot that. And he always treated people. It didn't matter if you were the custodian or Steven Spielberg. Ron would treat you with respect and deference. He was just great to work for. He had this great attitude. So they were wonderful. And as a consequence, the people on the lot who came to make movies and to do voiceovers and to do various things, that attitude that just permeates, and people are respectful. I can honestly say that of the A-list actors and actresses that came through there, 99.9% were wonderful people, and they were nice and they were kind and they treated people well. Sometimes their personal assistants could be difficult, but the actors themselves were actually pretty terrific people.
You talked about the fact that you were called upon to protect these folks, not just when they were filming at the studio, not just when they were on set in shooting a feature film or a television show, but actually when they were on location, and sometimes even when they were far from home overseas, filming in places that were not the most entirely safe. And that seems to me to be an incredibly hard job, depending upon where they're choosing to film.
It can be. I think what you have to do in that job is that component of the job. We were shooting one of the Bourne movies, and I believe we were in Morocco. So we're a long way from home, and you've got a production crew on that movie, about 240 people, and you got Matt Damon, some pretty important people, and you've got to come up with a plan. It's your responsibility to, if something goes wrong and sideways, you have to get all those people out of there. And how are you going to do that successfully? And it's your responsibility. Now, that doesn't mean that I wrote the evacuation plan, but I had the good sense to find people who I could rely on. And my plug was to the State Department and the regional security officers that work in the various out of our embassies and our consulates. These people are unbelievable. They're fantastic. They know the turf. They know the people. They know the politics. They know the dangers. And when you put together an evacuation plan, you can put it before them and they'll review it for you and they'll critique it. They made my job so much easier. And so when we put the security team on the ground there, they immediately hooked up with the RSOs and the people. And that made it go almost seamlessly. That made the job so much easier. And again, I got to give credit to those people because they did the heavy lifting. I coordinated it, but they were really the boots on the ground that made it happen.
I think it's really important to understand and I think people in Hollywood generally know this, that it's all fun and games to be a really famous actor until you realize that you're pretty valuable to kidnap and that your family's pretty valuable to kidnap and that there's no amount of money you wouldn't pay to get your kid back. And so when you're traveling, even shooting here in the wilds of Los Angeles can seem pretty risky some days, but imagine going to the other side of the planet to a location that you haven't been to before. You may or may not speak the language. If you're really relying upon whoever the studio's picked out to provide security for your entire life, because you could go missing in a heartbeat or get shot to death. Just
It's very true. And you sit down with the crew ahead of time. It's not done in a vacuum. You have meetings when they're going to greenlight a picture to go somewhere. Universal was really good about this. I was sitting in the room with the director and the producer and the casting director and the location. And so you were privy to where they were going to go. And because of Ron, I had veto rights. I could tell the director no. Now, they wouldn't like it. And they might go to Ron and say, I want to change this, but he never overruled me. He always, and which is, to me, it made my job easier, but he had faith that I wasn't going to push a movie out of a spot they wanted to be in. But we had one director that wanted to shoot in Mexico. Okay, that's fine. But he wanted to shoot at the time in Juarez, and that was not a safe place to be. And I could not, in good conscience, put a 200-person crew in that locale at that time, given everything that was happening. Now, I was able to offer the director like 3 or 4 different cities that we could easily police and would stay within budget. The other thing, too, you have to be cognizant they have a budget. You can't just say, we're going to pack up and go to something. We're going to go to Barcelona. It'll be much nicer. A lot of money. We were able to keep it within budget. And to the director's credit, after everything was explained, he said, okay, I get it. We'll move it over here. And so that went fine. But yeah, sitting there in the room trying to come up with a plan. And then you would tell the people when you met with the actors and the production crew, don't go here. Don't go there. Don't go to the ATM machine at 2 a.m. because you want to go drinking somewhere. That's just stupid. You're going to get robbed. And that you would get robbed in San Francisco, Los Angeles, or Oakland. It wouldn't make any difference. It doesn't have to be Mexico. There are people out there that watch drunks at ATM machines and take their money. So you would want to give people some just common sense advice. So it's not in a vacuum. You do work with everybody, and hopefully you get them all on the same page. And for the most part, when we were shooting around the country, around the world, we didn't have too many problems. And again, RSOs from the State Department, that was the first place I called. Said, we want to go here. What's your take on it? And sometimes they'd come back and say, ooh, don't go there. That's a bad place. As a matter of fact, we would get updated lists from the State Department about what places you shouldn't go and why. There was a lot of information at my disposal. I didn't have to make too many decisions just on my own.
do you think when you're talking to people about bad actors, about criminals, very few have met true criminals, career criminals, the kind of people who prey upon people as a methodology for survival or because they're crazy or because of whatever, or people who just, lose it and end up murdering their wife or murdering their husband because they just go crazy one day. People haven't been in those situations. They haven't had those experiences. Do you find, and one of the things you talked about in your writing is trying to help people see those people, those criminals, those bad actors, those people having a really bad day doing something really terrible that ruins their life. Trying to give the sense of what it's really as opposed to what they imagine it.
Yeah, the deed is unimaginable. By the time we get them, and frequently it's not. Sometimes on domestic violence, you get there and it's a smoking gun. Everybody's still in the same house, same room. But a lot of times, the arrest is made days later, some significant period of time lapse. And so the person by that time, they're not as worked up as they were when it happened, excluding the serial killer who's methodically doing something. But so they ratcheted down from this manic situation, and now they're seemingly somewhat normal. You sit down across the table from them in an interview room, and they're pretty rational, calm, and you're having a conversation with somebody who might have killed 3 people 72 hours ago. And that's kind of a weird situation to be in. And you, if you have the interview skills, and that's something that comes over time, is you can't sit down across the table from that person and say, "Oh my God, you horrible person. How could you have done that?" And sometimes you see that on television where they come in and with this really hard hitting interview. That doesn't, in my experience, that has not been very effective. The good interviewers, the good interrogators are really interviewers. I would skip. Interrogation has a harsh ring to it, and you tend to think of waterboarding somebody or something like that, this enhanced interrogation technique. Good detective, a good homicide inspector, is able to have a conversation, and it's an interview, and it's a back and forth, and it goes on. It's not, you let the person talk. As a matter of fact, one of the most effective tools you can have in the room is quiet. Be silent. Don't say anything. Most people can't stand that. They can't stand that void. They've got to fill the void and talk to you. And they'll tell you things that they probably shouldn't. And the Miranda decision, everybody gets read their rights. It's so rote right now that nobody pays any attention to it. I've sat down with people, you read them the Miranda rights, and they're looking at a homicide charge. But they'll talk to you. They still want to talk to you. And they want to tell you their side. And legitimately, they could be telling you a perfectly plausible story, but they got to get it out there. And so that interview technique, that skill of sitting down and interviewing somebody and making them comfortable. And when I say this, I have a guy in mind, and his name is Jack Cleary. And Jack Cleary was a homicide inspector in San Francisco. He was a legend. And I had the pleasure of being a fly on the wall watching him interview people on more than one occasion. And I recall multiple homicide where this person was going to be probably going away from prison for the rest of their life. He conducted a couple-hour interview with this person. And at the end of the interview, and the person gets up, reaches across the table, shakes his hand, and thanks him.
Wow.
And I'm thinking, that's what being a homicide inspector, that's interview skill, is that you can sit down, have a conversation with somebody that's going to send them to San Quentin for the rest of their life and have them thank you. And he had people that he put away that still wrote him, liked him. He treated people with respect and dignity, and he had a conversation. And it was amazing. He was so effective. And that's the interview skill set that I want. That's what I want my guys to have in the book. I want that ability to sit down and talk to somebody. You don't berate them. It's just not that style. It's good on TV. It looks good. It does that sort of thing. But what really works is talking to somebody, making that connection.
Is it the case that You sound less traumatized than I would imagine a person with the vast experience of seeing very ugly and crazy things and dealing with there's obviously the normal traumas of everyday living, helping people through on their really bad days when their car's been stolen or their kid's gone missing. You seem and not to mention the occasional dead person who has been murdered by the and you get to actually go find the person that killed them. You sound less traumatized than I would expect you to sound, and do you think it has to do with this notion of community-based policing and the idea that at the heart of it, most y these people have had a bad day, they've done bad things, but they may be crazy, but they're still people? Or, like, how are you not being really adversely affected by the stuff that you've seen and the stuff you've had to help other people deal with?
A couple of divorces will toughen you up.
Mm. Sorry.
But there's I think you have to have empathy, and you're called on. I think about what's the worst thing you have to do in this job, and it's as a patrol officer. It's the worst thing you have to do in the job is to make a death notification.
Mm.
And you have to go tell somebody that their brother, sister, husband, wife, whatever, son, daughter, isn't coming home. That and that you have to find a way to say that doesn't just hit them over the head with a 2x4, and to um, soften it. You can't totally sugarcoat it. Yeah, it's a piece of bad news. You have to deliver it. And I found in my career of the calls that you had to make, and Berkeley was very strict, and most departments are. On TV, death notifications are made by phone. No, they're not made by phone. They're made in person, and somebody has to do it. And I can vividly remember it was Easter Sunday morning.
Mm.
And we got a call from, I think it was Fresno County Sheriff, maybe. There had been a car accident, and a young man, 26, 27-year-old young man, had been killed. And he was driving home. And he was teaching down in Los Angeles, but grew up in Berkeley. He was coming home for Easter Sunday dinner at his folks' house. And I had to go I got the dad outside and talked to him first. And then he had to tell, I could still remember mom. And it was like somebody just stuck a pin in a balloon. She just deflated. And I can still see her. To this day, I can see her. And the trauma and the agony in that woman's face, and the father too, but she was it was so vivid. So I hated those calls. I hated them. But you try to do it as kindly as you could. So yeah, that wears on you. The good news is you don't have to do that all the time. And you get to do other nice things and good things, and you get to help people. And I think most people go in law enforcement because they do want to help people. I honestly think that's the motivating factor. And I also think a lot of us went in, myself especially, I don't like bullies. I've never liked bullies. And I like being able to intercede on behalf of the underdog. I like being able to get between the victim and the bully and put the bully in their place, so to speak. So that's part of it. But you can't, that's another thing on television all the time. The detective comes home and, I'm sorry, dear, I can't tell you what I did today. I can't talk about my job. I can't. No, you can't. No, I'm not going to go in and sit down with my children and my spouse and go into details about an autopsy. But at the same time, we had a really lousy case today. We had a kid that got killed. You don't have to have and I try it in the book. I do that too. In my books, they all have their crime mysteries. They have a murder. You can't have a murder mystery without a murder. But I don't dwell on the murder. I don't dwell on how the person was killed. I'll say how they got killed, the general, but I don't do a blow by blow. And I used Quentin Tarantino as an example, who I think is an absolutely brilliant writer and director. A little gratuitous on violence occasionally, I don't want quite that level. In Inglourious Bastards, where he has a situation where the guy goes after the German officer with a baseball bat. I get it. When he hits him the first time, I understand. I get it. I got the whole picture. Don't need any more. The 25th and 26th strikes are a little gratuitous. I don't want to go into that level. You got to have it. I would rather the focus be on the people that are doing the case, investigating the case, and the procedural part. You talked about that you want it to be procedurally accurate. You want I use San Francisco as a base of operations, and my detectives are San Francisco inspectors. And I try not to have north-south streets that intersect. I try and make the streets real. I try and make the landmarks real. And I don't have DNA evidence collected at 5 p.m. and the results at 5:02 p.m. It doesn't happen that way. So I try and point out that even though we're moving along this path toward apprehension, there's time lags. It takes time to get evidence processed. It takes time to get DNA run through, lab results. All that stuff takes time. And even though you're hot on somebody's trail, there are certain roadblocks that there's nothing you can do about it. They are time consuming.
But it's also the case that if you know your community well, you might not have to wait for the DNA to get back.
Sometimes you have the information at your disposal. You're right. And I think the key is trust. And I think and I'll get on my law enforcement soapbox here. I think we've lost trust in some areas of our community. I know we have. And we've brought that on ourselves in a number of areas. Some of it's richly deserved, some of it's not deserved. But we have to get it back. If we're going to function and we're going to protect people, they have to believe we're there to protect. And they have to feel comfortable that they can talk to us. And if that barrier exists where you're seen as the enemy and no one's going to talk to you, and without that conversation, there's going to be a lot of unsolved cases. Because as good as we may be, as great an interviewer as you might be, if you don't have somebody to interview, those skills are wasted. So someone's got to point you in the right direction, and it's usually somebody on the block. It's usually somebody who. That's why homicides used to be. They still have the highest closure rate of almost any case, but they used to be in a 80 percentile because almost all the time was somebody who knew you. It was pretty straightforward. If you died, you died at the hands of someone who knew you. But now we've had drive-by shootings, gang shootings, indiscriminate shootings, innocent bystanders getting shot. There's no rhyme or reason. Those are horrible, and they're just such a whodunit.
One of the things I really like about the old shows, like Dragnet and so forth, is they would talk about the fact that police officers, the uniform protects them. If people like police officers, the fact that you're wearing something that's very unique and your car is different, it means people see it and they don't just think that person's here to help me. They think I'm here to help them. They might need me. The fact that you're wearing that uniform means that police officer may need to ask me a question. I need to tell the police officer something.
That's true. You used, we talked about community policing. It's a two-way street. We're good at what we do. We're well trained in California. I have worked in other states, but California is really head and shoulders above most. And part of it's because we have legislation that has held law enforcement to a little higher standard, and we work at that. But if people won't talk to you and that people don't feel that they can be part of the solution, then they don't. You're right. They pull away. That just won't work. There was a study done years ago. I think it was probably in the 60s in Kansas City. And it was famous because the theory in law enforcement was suppress crime, put a bunch of cops in there and then that'll suppress crime. Everybody will be happy. So what they did is they took neighboring areas of Kansas City and one, they policed in a normal fashion. One, they doubled the police force on that area, and one, they removed the police. So at the end of a month or 6 weeks or 2 months, whatever the study ran, they surveyed people in the various areas. In the area that was status quo, everybody was just about the same. The area with all the police, the people were terrified because they saw all the police cars and they thought something must be terribly wrong. In the neighborhood that had no police, thought everything was wonderful and that there was no crime because there were no police. So it went against the theories of pouring all kinds of police into the area to make it happen. Now, I'm not advocating removing the police totally, but the study did show that just pouring police into it isn't necessarily a solution.
No, I think that's actually very insightful. It's just amazing how much I very profoundly believe that it's what writers bring to their story more true in crime than even other things like very few of us have met aliens, so can't really say that the science fiction folks have the opportunity to bring a lot of that experience. That said, some of the best science fiction writers have been people who have been exobiologists or who have been linguists because they do bring that knowledge into to the table. And I think when it comes to writing crime fiction, actually having met a few hundred murderers and having met a few hundred robbers and a few hundred victims may contribute to writing a better book because you actually bring insights that people would not have had otherwise.
I think also if I spent a little more time in Berkeley, I probably would have found some folks that did know aliens. We had some interesting folks out there.
My
But
brother worked in Berkeley, and I would agree, yes.
but we actually had a kind of worst. I worked up on Telegraph Avenue, it was south of the UST campus. We had a guy who was in a little room, like a two-room apartment. He was building an atomic bomb, and he was a PhD physicist at Cal. He was like his dissertation away from his doctorate.
Right.
And when we finally picked him up and put a 72-hour hold on him to meet with a psychiatrist, the people from Lawrence Radiation, the Livermore lab, were there, and they said he was close. They said this guy was. If he could have got some uranium and plutonium, he got things figured out. He was doing a pretty good job. Now that was a little unsettling that this guy was doing that, but yeah, and that was a wonderful. That was an interesting. Berkeley was great for that. You could go from that to any number of things. It was always no 2 days are the same.
So have you make your guys San Francisco detectives, are you gonna go ahead and write about Berkeley crimes one of these days? Because it sounds like there's
I'm,
something different about that.
I'm writing. I'm actually working on a kind of a memoir, for lack of a better word. I'm going to take the decade of 69 to 79
Mm.
in Berkeley as seen through the eyes of a police officer on the street. The whole gamut of U.S. politics, state politics, local politics, world events, Vietnam, political assassinations,
Okay. Right.
everything that was going on at that time, and how eventually, somehow or other, it would come back to Berkeley. If it didn't start there, it would end there, or it would pass through here. So just about every movement, the Black Panthers headquarters on Shattuck Avenue in Berkeley.
Yeah.
SDF was in Berkeley. The Weather Underground was in Berkeley. Patty Hearst came out of Berkeley. All these things that came out of Berkeley. So what I'm trying to do is take kind of world and local and political and national, talk a bit about those and the department, and then also put in there what the department was going through, because times were a changing.
Well, civil rights movement, and there's a lot going on.
First women police officers, first push to hire officers of color, first pushed it. And so how the department responded. And I think looking at it as being there during that time period, that I wanted to say that we did a pretty good job, probably better than most. And then I sat down and African American officers that were friends of mine, and got some insight into the fact that we dropped the ball in a lot of areas. And so I'm going to put that in there too. This is not all sweetness and light. We screwed up too.
I think that sounds like a great project, and I'll put in a plug. The Because you do know people from that community, I'd recommend that you get your camera or you get your cell phone and you record them because it'll help you. It'll make it easier for you to get transcriptions of the audio to use so you can have quotes and so forth. 2, you're capturing people that are not gonna be around forever.
Yeah.
And 3, you can actually cut it together to make a documentary, those people deserve to be seen and those stories deserve to be heard, and bringing it's just another piece of intellectual property, whether you're writing a book or you're doing capturing the video and cutting it together to create a documentary and mixing in footage and images that come from that time and so people can actually see it. I don't know, it sounds like I must confess, I was in San Francisco. I My father was working in Palo Alto, and so we would go to San Francisco regularly. We did go to Berkeley regularly. I'd be very passionate about this in any case, but particularly the topics that you're talking about are dear to my heart.
I think it was an important time. And I think it was an incredibly important time in law enforcement because we were transitioning from a white male traditional organization to something very different. And we looked different. We sounded in Berkeley, We didn't have what law enforcement would consider grooming regulations. We could have long hair, we could have beards, and that's in the 70s. And that was unheard of. As a police officer, if you had long hair or a beard, you couldn't possibly function as a police officer. You lost all credibility. That's not true. If you looked, that's not the case at all. But I remember we played in a police Olympic basketball game in Los Angeles, and LAPD made our officers show ID to get on the floor of the basketballs.
Tell APD they're weird down there.
And they wouldn't believe that they were really cops. The department was different. And like I said, in my naivete as a white officer, I thought we were doing pretty good. And then you see this different perspective, and and some of whom didn't say anything when it was happening. And now these are friends, and you talk to them, and then they share anecdotal information. And then me, have to take a step back and say, wow, we really didn't do a really good job here. We should have done much better. And I plan to write it that way. We dropped the ball there. This was good. You did a good job here. You did a bad job here. And did you get better? Yes. Did we improve? Yes. And anyway, it's been fun to play with. It's totally obviously so different than writing crime fiction, but I'm having fun with it.
I think it sounds amazing. Which actually brings us to your writing. I think because I do run these events on a regular basis, I feel very passionate about helping creative people express themselves and making it so that to some degree they can, if they choose to, they can make the work they care the most about a living. They can also choose to write the book that they always wanted to write. The cool thing about writing a book, especially if you make it available on Amazon, is it's never going to go away. It'll be there and people will stumble across it. It's a message in a bottle. And there's people, if you've had a secret you've kept your whole life, or you've had something you've desperately wanted to tell people and you want to be able to tell the truth about it, being able to write a book, make it available on Amazon, being able to publish it as it's easy to do, using draft to digital. You can make it available on all the digital platforms. You can make it available in print. You can publish books on lulu.com. There's a million ways to get a story out. I know how important that is from personal creative standpoint. Telling the truth about things is very important to people. And I also know that some people want to make a living from their work. I like to enable them. And I find it amazing when people talk about the process by which they create. And in your particular case, I guess you were talking about the very famous and very successful author that you met at your last event. It would be interesting to hear you talk about how you write your work. Is it the case that you create an outline and then you write from start to finish, or is it the case you write in big bursts? Like I write chapters 1 through 4 and then I get stuck and then I figure out what I'm going to do chapters 4 through 8.
No, I don't use an outline. And I know I have an idea for the story. It usually starts like that for me. And I have my treasure trove of stories in my full file folder. And I will make, it's not an outline, but I'll write things that I want to address in the story. And then I look at anecdotal stuff. And sometimes for me, it's something that happened. It's something somebody said that was either very funny or poignant or whatever it is. I got to get that in someplace. So I'll actually write a chapter around that and then fit it into the story. So I have an idea what the story is going to be about. I'm not convinced in the beginning that I know how it's going to end. I'm going to catch the bad guy. I'm convinced of that. How I'm going to catch the bad guy, I'm not sure. And I'm saying this now, it's to segue a little bit into, there's 3 books that are out. There's a 4th book that I'm working on. And on this one, the bad guy he's a revenge killer. And he has a bone to pick with a group of people. And he's very smart. And he's patient. And he's able to wait 15, 18, 20 months before he kills again. And he doesn't kill in the same area. So you have different agencies involved, you have different terrain, you have different people. And I've spent so much time creating this monster who is so clever, I'm not sure how I'm going to catch her. I've painted myself into this proverbial corner that I just can't have this guy now leave fingerprints at the scene. He's been so meticulous. He's going to have to get caught on some really weird, fluky deal. And once I figure out what that is going to be, then I have to go back and embed little clues, little nuggets in the beginning of the story that won't mean anything to the person reading it. But by the end, oh, yeah, I get it. That's the way I write. I do write more in fits and starts than I do in a continuum. I try and write daily. I don't always do that because I still do some consulting work, and sometimes I actually have to work to pay for my writing hobby. Yeah, until you get an agent and somebody out there advocating, it's really hard to do it by yourself, and you find that out, and you can paper the room with rejection letters from agents. You get a ton of those. So at some point, I'd love to be able to find somebody who wants to represent it and do that. And I think that takes a lot of pressure off, allows you to do other things. But so it's a kind of a fits and start. And I do try and do it only because everybody says you should. And it doesn't matter if you write a chapter or two, or even if you write about what you saw outside your window, just write so that you just keep the habit and treat it like a job. That it really is. You want to make any money at it, you want to actually do it, and make it a job, get a routine, and that helps. And we mentioned the author when it was Michael Conley, who I had heard speak, and he talked about that he likes to write in the morning. He
Mhm.
says, I started writing when it's still dark outside. And he said, I don't know whether it's just me. I have the feeling when I'm writing that I'm the only person up and about in the world at this time. It's very soothing for me. And I like to write during that time frame. But I do get up every morning and do that. And other authors I've talked to who have a good flavor to me have been and I will have to say that the ones I have met, like Conley and James Elroy and Sheldon Siegel, people who have done very well, they're very kind to people who are trying to write a book, and they'll answer your question. They'll talk to you. They're really nice people. I have to say, of the writers I've met are really first class. They're really neat people.
I always really liked writers and teachers and filmmakers too, because they're all very hopeful people. And
Sure.
they really do care about people. They actually find people interesting.
I think, and certainly you're not no threat. Yeah.
And fine.
Yeah.
So when it comes to publishing your work, are you currently self-publishing, or is it the case that you're working with a publisher? How are you actually releasing your work as a role?
I think I'm doing what's called a hybrid, where I'm representing myself, but I have a publisher.
Cool.
The publisher doesn't market it. I do my own marketing.
I don't think any publisher these days, even if you're like even unless, you are,
Michael Conley.
yeah, even, my buddy has to do more marketing than he expected to have to do, but unless somebody gave you $1 million book deal, I think everybody's marketing their work. I think if you have a publisher, they expect you to market on a regular basis, but, it's cool to have a publisher. I think that I've had so I've written a lot of books over the years, and the first books that I wrote and I worked with publishers before, and the first one, I was very spoiled by because I had 15% of gross
Ooh,
on like a $40 book, and that was back when that was money, okay?
and that's money today.
And it was nice. It was like that was a good deal. So now whenever and so I actually very much enjoy self-publishing, and I like it for a variety of reasons. One is that I like being able to tell the story that I wanna tell, and also I like very much owning the intellectual property, but one thing that was nice about working with a publisher was the fact that they could put something into the market so quickly because they were doing it month in and month out, where because after I decide I'm gonna write a book, I can write the book, but then it's still gonna be like, I gotta do a month or 2 or 3 getting it out the door. It
And the thing with publishing, I went with a publisher and it was a catastrophe. And I'll share this with anyone who's listening. If you get the phone call or the internet that says, for $2,500, we'll make you a New York Times best-selling author and we'll market your book, they're not going to. They're lying. And I'm a cop and I think I'm a pretty good judge of people. And I usually do my due diligence, but boy, that offer sounded awfully good. And I took the bait and I paid for it. So I learned, and of course, they're judgment proof because when I did do my due diligence and find out the company was headquartered in Pakistan and I can't even sue them, I went from there to self publish on Amazon. And that's expensive and pretty easy to do. The drawback is you're one of 1 million books that Amazon publishes every and until you've had 3 books published, they won't even talk to you about advertising
Yes.
and pushing your book. So you got to get 3 out there before that happens. A friend of mine wrote a book, and he's a sexual homicide inspector, and he wrote a book, and he published with Palmetto, who's the company I work with, and they treated him really well. He told me that. I called them. That's how it came about for my books. So I went with the internet scam and got burned. Tried to self-publish with Amazon, and it was fine. It's just you're lost in the shuffle. I went this route, and then I hired a publicist.
Yes.
That's how I'm in front of you today, is through Bruce and his work. And he's been good about getting me out there, that some book signings and shows. And I wouldn't be able to do it myself. I don't know who to call. I don't know. He does. And so that's been a big help. So basically I've got a publisher and a publicist. And
Sounds like a great combination from a variety of perspectives because it allows you to write.
yeah, I just need the agent now to go carry it all to Little Brown or somebody like that and get it out there.
Actually, you may find that Hollywood these days, if you have successful books, they don't care whether or not they went through a publisher, they'll come directly to you. And the thing is, you do have a really good background. You have the stuff that you're talking about is of incredible interest to a lot of people. San Francisco and Berkeley are always very timely topics. And I think that murder fiction, detective stories, especially police procedural, are the kind of thing that make good TV shows these days. So,
I agree. I think they do too. I think, and again, I would wish was it that it would be accurate. And I understand the constraints of television and that you have only so many minutes you got to solve a triple homicide in 43 minutes. It's hard to do. So you have to sacrifice a little technical stuff. But yeah, I agree with you. I do think that they're interesting. It's an area that is in the paper every day. People see, but they don't know that much about it. So the book gives them a chance to delve a little bit deeper. And writing and San Francisco is so easy to write about. One, it's home, so I know the city and I know the feel for it. And it doesn't really matter if you're a native San Franciscan and you go, oh, I know that street, I know that house, or you live in Des Moines and you've never been to California, but you've seen San Francisco. You've seen it on the news. You've seen it on the movies. You've seen it on television. So when the book goes to St. Peter and Paul Church, you go, oh, that's the church where Dirty Harry was in that movie. And so there's connectivity even for people who've never been there. So San Francisco is a great city to focus on just because no matter where the reader is picking up the book, they'll identify with some part of it.
and I also think you got to write about stuff that you love. And there's nothing, I got to say, I really love California. I love San Francisco. I love LA. I love California. I love it. I think the California dream is about 5,000 times better than quote unquote the American dream because we're all about let's all succeed together. We're better. We're far more than the sum of our parts.
I agree with you. I love it here too. I've lived elsewhere but no, that's why I came home. Certainly I didn't come home because I didn't like New Mexico. I love New Mexico. I go back when I can.
Almost as good as California.
Yeah, almost. Very different. Absolutely. Totally different, but still a really cool place. And I wouldn't have traded my time there. I'm really glad I did that.
Being from California makes you the kind of person that can love almost anywhere. But the point is, California.
Oh yeah, that's how to come home.
This is my place. These are my people. And then there's times when you go to other places and you just find yourself going, oh my, you guys live stupid. It's like, why are you living this weird way? Like, it's just
It's,
too
it is
much.
interesting. And also you go places and they look at you like you have 2 heads if you're from California.
I know.
There's
Keep trying to tell you that you're the crazy one. And you're like, okay, I just have to say, it's very nice. One, we have great weather. Two, the people are really nice. They really do. When they say have a good day, they're pretty serious about it.
I've gone places where, and there's a lot of police officers who have left California.
Yeah, I know.
And you went to Idaho and Tennessee and Wyoming and again, I've been to those places and they're beautiful and they're lovely. I have a good friend who lives in Montana, and I told them they obviously sold you that house in the summertime because no one would buy a house in Montana in the winter. I've never been so cold in my life, but it's a whole different ballgame. They're great places to visit, but that's not where I want to live. But these people have moved out there, and I remember one fellow telling me how he's in Wyoming. Yeah, our roads in Wyoming are so much better. You pay bigger taxes in California, and your roads are potted. And I said, yeah, our roads, but we have 40 million people, and we have a gazillion cars. Our roads get used all day, all night, 24/7. You have fewer people in your state than are in San Francisco, and that road gets driven on twice a day. Of course, it's in good shape. It never gets used. So,
Get me started.
so So it's I understand that the roads may be better, but they're better because you build them once and you don't have to touch it for 20 years. Our roads have to be repaved every 3 to 4 years.
It's I look at people, I just go, okay, we got 40 million people here. We're the fifth largest economy in the world. So, all right, we're good. Okay. We're doing chill. And mostly we get along pretty good. It's not like it's we have our troubles, but it's for 40 million people, we get along real good. It's like there's not a lot of places. I went to Hawaii and it's 3 million people. And then there's those places like Wyoming only has 500,000 people. And you're like, why do you get two senators? What the hell's that? You don't need two senators. There's
Same with
really unfair about that deal.
it is that is a strange medical deterioration, but that's I guess in a way that does make the United States interesting.
It's true.
There's 50 totally unique places that somehow, hopefully, in Washington can pull together to get something done. It's not happening, obviously, a lot of discord at the moment, but, hopefully we'll get past and get to the point where people are actually doing the business of the
I
people
think it
and
will come again. I
not the
think it's,
political party. And
think it-
most of both parties are both guilty of being partisan.
I think it'll come again. I think it's just, but again, that's the California dream. We really can get along. We really have more in common than that separate us. I have a lot of hope for that, and I think it's what I like about living here. Eminently hopeful, and it has a lot to do with why Berkeley was such a trippy place to live.
It was it was an experience. It was, again, one of those things where I'm glad I did it. I'm glad I learned my trade there. Let's put it that way. If it wasn't for Berkeley, I never would have learned how to be a police officer. I never would have learned what it was about and how to function. And I've taken that with me every place I've gone. You have to be careful because you go to another department, you're in a command position. You don't want to say, this is the way we did it in Berkeley.
But
This
just
way you're going to do it, but you just have to couch it in different terms. So you're not foisting it on people. You want them to buy into it. And presenting that how about if we try this and they do it, they go, ooh, that works. That's the way we did it in Berkeley. No, just it works. And they get it. Everybody gets it. Once it works and the job becomes easier because people are now talking to you and that sort of thing. Yeah, I'm glad I was there. I'm glad I did my time in Los Angeles. I said that my penance down there. But and
you
like,
worked with Universal. How much penance was?
Universal was unique. There's no question about it. That was
That was an e-ticket ride. It's like like working at Disneyland. You go, wow,
you just said it. I used that term after a pursuit one night, and I said that was a real e-ticket ride. And the audience of officers looked at me and said, "What's an e-ticket?"
I'm not even going to talk to you people.
I know they had no idea when they went.
They spread the body.
Was the one price. They had no idea what an e-ticket was.
Yeah, that's because they don't know anything about Disneyland. Anyway, because back in the day, Disneyland would give you tickets,
Yes, ABCD.
right? And the e-tickets were the good ones.
Oh,
The golden keys. Sometimes some things it's very bad when a situation turns into a golden key situation. Golden key rides are like, oh my god, anything could happen, and it's going to be
First, Universal was one price admission.
yeah, exactly. So did everybody else become. One of the questions we have, Robert Coward. He's actually one of our members, and because we've talked before, I know that he actually is working on something that is, and I think when I first heard about your work, I thought you would be particularly valuable to mystery writers and to people that were working on revenge products, things that incorporate violence, those kind of high tension books. and I had Robert in mind, actually. So he says he's very interested in what you've presented and the process of investigations and so forth. And is there a way that he can first, have you can you go ahead and mention your website where people can find you so that and then maybe he can reach out to you? And I don't know if you ever consult with people
I
where
like I would certainly talk to somebody if I can help them. We just talked about some of these. I'm certainly not in the category of the ones we talked about, but if I can help somebody, give them a piece of advice, I'm sure. The website is goldengatetales.com. There's a forum portion on that, so someone can put a question in there, and I'll try to back. And they can send me an email at brian@goldengatetales.com, and BRIAN, and I'll check the email. And I'm pretty good about getting back. I get back to you in the first day, but I'm usually within 48 hours, I'll get back. Just depends what's happening in my end.
you're very sweet. Generally speaking, my folks are tend to be very polite, and so I hope I let me know if anybody misbehaves, but
I don't
I
know.
still like them very much.
But yeah, I do. If someone's writing about something and they're not a police officer and they want a police officer's perspective on something, I'd be more than happy to do that. That if that'll help them make their book better or what they're writing better, that's the end result. Good.
Cool. Nikki Cole says, "Thank you for your comments about Tarantino. I'm a filmmaker and I direct a lot of true crime series, but I won't work on the ones I consider to be violence porn. As Brian says, I get it. I don't need the gratuitous stuff." Whole.
Thank you. I think I agree. I want the story to be about the investigators and the investigation, that part, and the relationships between the investigators. I think that's part of the fun too. In my investigators, there is a give and take that goes on between the investigators, and there's one I'll share that for people not from San Francisco, this will mean nothing, but from the Bay Area, growing up there, I'm a product of parochial school, and I went to St. Ignatius High School in San Francisco, which is a Jesuit high school. Our rival was Sacred Heart, which is a Christian Brothers school, and we were both all-boys schools. There are a number of San Francisco police and firefighters that went to St. Ignatius and Sacred Heart, and that rivalry persists in everything we do. We're all good friends. We all associate. We intermarried, all of these things. But in the book, we have two of the inspectors are from each school, and there's this undercurrent of back and forth between the two. It's okay, and it probably doesn't mean something to anyone else, but anyone from the city or the Bay Area, they get it. But I have fun with that.
That is very cool. That sounds very hip. Nikki also says she can't wait to read the Berkeley book. And I think if you're looking for market approbation and market support, that Berkeley book sounds really interesting. It sounds like it's the kind of thing that a lot of people would find interesting from a variety of perspectives.
It's a work in progress. I made a fair amount of progress on it. I think I'm getting close. That's been subject of a number of rewrites. Like I said, there was one point where I thought I was cruising until I sat down and talked with a couple of my buddies, and they said, "That's not exactly the way we saw it."
It was yeah, very nice to be you.
Yeah, should have seen it from where I was sitting. Yeah.
Actually, have you it'll also be interesting to hear how you address the women police officers that were working in that time. I'm just barely old enough to remember when a woman I recall my mother feeling very special because she could get her husband didn't said it was okay for her to have a checking didn't expected her to be able to have a checking account, have a credit card, have, like, stuff in her own name because that in that time period, that's just you're right on the edge of the time where women couldn't even have that, much less be a police officer. What the hell are you talking about? How could you even contemplate that?
We had when I was there, I guess I was a sergeant when the first women came on the job, and anecdotally, I remember listening on the radio. Obviously, I'm on the street to a call of a domestic violence call, and I know the address and I know who the players are. And the guy involved is about 6'3", goes about 240 when he's in shape, which is usually right after he got out of county jail, because all he's done for the last 6 months is lift weights. So they send one of the women officers and a male officer. So I roll on the call, and I'm parked out in front of the house, and I've taken my watch off. I've taken my pins out of my pocket, anything that's breakable, because I know what's going to happen. I've wrestled with this guy before. And he's on the top of the stairs, which is terrifying because you don't want to go down the stairs with him. So I get to the top of the stairs, and he is just beside himself. He's MFing everybody in the crowd and thought no one's going to take him. And she looks at him and says, "Stop it. There's a lady here." watch your mouth. And he looked at her and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, ma'am." She said, "Put your hands behind your back." "Yes, ma'am." She cuffed him, walked him down, put him in the car. So what am I doing wrong all these years? All I did is fight this guy every single time. But he had nothing to prove fighting her. But I was his size. So fighting me meant something. He got some brownie points at the county jail for taking on the big cop, but he wouldn't get any for hitting a woman. So she figured that out right away and turned this thing into a simple arrest. And I went back and I said, this may work. This whole concept. They're bringing something to the game here that I never really thought about before. So
I used to work in tech, very male-dominated profession, and I always scored extremely well when people were rating me for as a trainer. It had everything to do with the fact that nobody ever had anything to prove against me. There was never a conflict.
yeah,
They just knew I didn't care. Like, I was literally just there to help them. I've just here it's nothing, like, there's no opportunity to turn it into who's smarter than who or who it's it and I'd see my fellow male instructors and male there would be conflicts. People would get very head up because they wanted to be smarter than that guy. It's the conflict never came up. It was never a conversation.
I think for me and he, there was a testosterone battle going on there too, and I wasn't going to give an inch either. And that's stupidity on my part. But looking back on it, there was probably a better way. The thing was, she figured it out in 2 seconds and turned. She obviously knew that this guy was 8 inches taller than her, had her by 100 and something pounds. There's no way you're going to have a fist fight with this guy. So she outsmarted him. And I thought, I should have thought that a long time ago.
Take some options off the table. You go, clearly we're not gonna have a physical conflict. Clearly that won't be happening.
Yeah. And he got it. He said, okay, I'm going. Yeah. But it was an interesting time. And I remember things like us. You had a loan officer, for instance, with a single mom.
Oh,
He might have to take a week when we marked people off, if they took a sick day. You had on the time sheet, you had an S for a sick day or an F for a family sick day. And one sergeant who was somewhat of a idiot, he didn't want women officers. So he would write them up for abuse of sick time on the evaluation. I noticed that, and I was a supervisor. So I went down to the timekeeper's office, sat down, and looked at the officers. Well, the women officers who were single moms, they did have a little bit more on sick time than some of the male counterparts, but all of it was family sickness. When their kid was sick, and they were working midnight shift, and the kid got sick at 10 o'clock at night, they didn't have a babysitter, and they couldn't get one before midnight, they would have to use a family sick day. That's not an abuse of sick time. That's a unique situation for a single parent dealing. And at that time, most single parents were female, not men. So they were not abusing sick time, but he was using that to knock them down and make them less in the eyes of people on their probationary reports, et cetera. So that was wrong. And that should never have happened. And we're not for a few of us who went down and looked at the books and said, no, you can't do this. And having a lieutenant who was a great boss, who, when that was pointed out to him, leveled the playing field immediately and took all that out. That was critical, but it did happen, and that was wrong. And it shouldn't have happened. And it was unique to the single moms.
that's amazing. I cannot wait to read that book, and I hope you write it quickly and let me know when it's available so I can bring you back and have you talk about it in more detail and talk about the process of writing it. And then go ahead, please, and tell people how they can find you online. And if you want, you can if you have social media channels, you can share them. But I think you also have them linked to your website. So
They are. Yeah, the website is good. I think that's a simple way. The books are there. They're on Amazon. They're on Barnes and Noble. And I'm going to be at Barnes and Noble in Santa Rosa on Saturday. Do a signing there. And didn't want up the Russian River, which back on the 16th, at a little bookstore in Guerneville, which was really a lot of fun. It was a small group, but a good audience, a lot of good questions and a lot of interesting folks. So that part's been fun. It's been great meeting people and answering questions and trying to promote the books. I think they're fun. I think they're easy reads. They're not every time.
definitely, if you guys are looking for a new crime writer to fall in love with, I think you should definitely visit the website, check out the books, and you should start reading them. They really are entirely different than
It just for me.
they will remind you of your favorite crime writers, but it's interesting to hear police officers and police work itself featured more than, exactly how a woman's throat was sliced or exactly how somebody was stabbed to death.
And you just want to have they were stabbed to death.
Yeah, I
And
would like
you
let's
can,
let's
if the knife becomes critical, you can describe the knife. You don't have to describe how many times it was plunged into the person's body and how it that people, like I said, we talked earlier, but I get it. You don't have to. I'm a smart guy. I gathered they were dead.
I pretty much got
Yeah,
like
I got it.
beginning of the story. So Sharon Kennedy Totson, she actually is a producer, and actually she actually teaches martial arts.
Uh,
She's a very interesting cat. But thank you very much, and she says this was an amazing event, and I agree. Thank you very much for taking the time to chat with us, and if I could be of service to you going forward, please do reach out.
oh, Thank you. Oh no, it's been a pleasure. This has been a really nice conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. Remember to visit nancyfultonmeetups.com if you need support for your work. I very much appreciate hearing from you, so keep me informed about what you're working on. Thank you, man.